Welcome to the Book of God's Works. Today we'll be examining a lecture given by astrophysicist Neil Degrasse Tyson. Let's take a look.
Now, Ptolemy had sort of the best going explanation anyone had put forth with the epicycles and the like. But nonetheless, this is the boundary between what is known and unknown about how the machinery of the universe works, and he pens these words, which for me are one of the most beautiful and poetic references to the state of one's knowledge ever written. I know that I am mortal by nature and ephemeral, but when I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies, I no longer touch earth with my feet. I stand in the presence of Zeus himself and take my fill of ambrosia. And so therein is this emotional, he's got this sort of religious feeling at the limits of his knowledge. And this is a trend that will continue for thousands of years to follow this. At least 2,000 years to follow this. And you don't have, and this whole notion of intelligent design, this is intelligent design. This quote that I just read to you is Ptolemy invoking intelligent design. No, he's not trying to get that into the classroom. He's not, there's the politics of intelligent design in modern times. But what I think has been swept under the rug that we have to contend with as a community of people who are sort of truth seekers is the fact that some of the greatest minds that have preceded us have done just this. Okay? That's Ptolemy.
All right, so let's dissect what Dr. Tyson was trying to say here. It sounds like he's saying something to the effect that these scientists weren't very religious and that they were just throwing in a sort of a God of the gaps argument that things that they didn't understand, they categorized or used religious speak in sort of classifying the things that they didn't understand yet, and that God wasn't a real thing. It was just sort of a classification of things unknown. Another way is just saying God of the gaps. However, from a religious perspective, an LDS perspective, if we are really children of God and we are learning to become like God, then as we're doing science, we're discovering this design, and we're excited about what we're discovering. And we're also recognizing that we aren't God, and there's many things we can't figure out yet, but we can see the design that's there, and we're wondering how this is put together, and we kind of keep working on it and trying to dissect it, and eventually we'll figure it out. And by the time we figured out all these things, we will probably become like God. So there is no God of the gaps from an LDS perspective. The other part, I want to show that these religious folk, these scientists from the past, were fairly religious people, which is, I think, totally ignored by Dr. Tyson. So I want to talk about some of my favorites just briefly. There's a trio of scientists that overlap, starting with Humphrey Davy, and he started his career in Penzance, England, and physically worked his way closer and closer to London, and did a lot of reckless things that he became famous for, basically trying a bunch of gases on himself. He'd breathe them in, see what kind of effect they had on him, like carbon monoxide, and a few times he almost killed himself. And he comes across this nitrous oxide, which he writes a paper on, laughing gas, and lets people try it and try their effects, and he gets known for that, and eventually moves his way over to London and takes Volta's battery, makes a giant one, and uses it to break up potash into discovering potassium and sodium and some other elements. But mostly where I'm trying to head to is the lectures that were given by him and others in the Royal Institute. He gave a lot of lectures about his experiments, and he made the Royal Institute lectures very popular. And one of his attendees was a guy by the name of Faraday. And I got some images of him, so let's take a look at that. So here's Faraday, and here's the Royal Institute. He was a book apprentice, but he really wanted to be a scientist. But he was kind of tracked for the 7-year apprenticeship. But he was invited to go to the Royal Institute to see some of Humphrey Davy's lectures. And so he does that, and he takes very meticulous notes. And then he compiles them all and puts them in a book form, a 300-page book, and gives them to Davy. And Davy's quite impressed and hires him on. And long story short, Faraday starts giving lectures at the Royal Institute, makes this induction coil. You see the picture of there, which according to, I've heard from the Royal Institute, is one of their greatest pieces in their collection is this induction coil. And then Maxwell, the third in the trio, he takes Faraday's work and moves it along and comes up with these 4 equations which talk about the flux, the force lines that come out of magnets and around wires when current flows through and so forth. Today we still have lectures in this Royal Institute. I'd love to go there. Someday I'd like to go there and just, there's a lot of history in that place up here in the corner. And I've also put a few quotes, but the point I'm rallying around is this lecture, this Royal Institute, where they get these lectures. Most of these things are recorded, and you can look through their notes, you can read. In their presentations, they mentioned their beliefs and talked about God. If you look at their personal lives, like Maxwell was a Presbyterian. He would gather every morning with his family, and they would have prayer meetings. And then we go back to Faraday. He's probably the most outspoken with his religious comments. I've left a few you can read up there. There's many more you can look up. And as well, he's constantly was invoking God in the observations that he was making on a daily basis, that he was prepping for his lectures, for his studies, constantly talking about the greatness of God and his design and seeing patterns in his observations he was making and so forth. So I think Dr. Tyson kind of missed the totality of their life, the totality of their faith, and how they express that. Not just these 3. You can look at many other scientists and see what they wrote about, what their feelings were. You're kind of not really allowed to do religious speak nowadays, it seems like, at least in these forums. So let's continue with Dr. Tyson and see what he talks about next, and we'll make some more comments.
But it gets interesting when we get sort of philosophically interesting when we get to this gentleman. I can back up here. Sir Isaac Newton. Now, I don't know what you know of Isaac Newton, but everything I've read of his tells me that there's no greater genius to ever walk the surface of this earth. I'm just I don't know if you've ever felt that about anybody. I didn't feel that about anybody. You just read what this man wrote, okay? Line by line by line. This guy was plugged into the machinery of the universe. I think he's unimpeachably brilliant. Unimpeachably brilliant. And let me read again what we heard from Mike Shermer earlier in Isaac Newton's writings. By the way, in his Principia, here's the page 1, page 0 of Principia. In it, he discovers the laws of motion, F equals ma, discovers the laws of gravity. It's all there. And he did this all before he turned 26. And in this, when he talks about motion, there's no reference to God. When he talks about his two-body force that he deduced, this universal law of gravitation, there is no mention of God. It's just not anywhere there because he understood it. He was on top of it. He was there. Even though the understanding of the motions of the planets before he came along was given unto God because nobody understood it, or nobody understood well enough to really believe that they had a full predictive handle on it in the way the universal law of gravitation supplied. And so what you have is Isaac Newton abandoning reference to God until he realizes that if all you do is calculate the two-body problem, here we have like the moon and earth. Yes, he's got that calculated. Now you have the sun and the earth. You got that. But wait a minute, now the earth and the moon go around the sun, and sometimes we're close to Mars and sometimes we're not. And when it comes near Mars, there's a tug that's stronger there than in any other part in the orbit. And then it comes over here, and then Jupiter tugs. And all these mini tugs. And so he's got to do this two-body problem for Earth, the moon, Earth and the sun, Earth, moon, and Mars, Earth, moon, Mars, and Jupiter, and it becomes a rapidly complex problem. And he realizes that, in fact, applying this simple sort of approach to calculating the stability of the solar system, he finds he can't stabilize the solar system. He can't account for how we have stayed this way for as long as what was possibly necessary from the beginning of the universe. And so what does he say? He's at his limits. He's at his limits. And so you read Principia, God is nowhere until you get to the general Sholem. And then he says the 6 primary planets. Back then there were 6 planets, okay? Now there's 8, in case you haven't been keeping track. Even if you thought there were 9, there are now 8. The 6 primary planets are revolved about the sun in circles concentric with the sun, and with motions directed towards the same parts and almost in the same plane. He's got the whole picture now, and he's trying to sort of account for that. But he can't just simply doing two-body calculations, certainly not without a computer or without a new kind of mathematics. He says, but it is not to be conceived. But is it not to be conceived that mere mechanical causes could give birth to so many regular motions? This most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. This is Isaac Newton invoking intelligent design at the limits of his knowledge. And I want to put on the table the fact that you have school systems wanting to put intelligent design into the classroom, but you also have the most brilliant people who ever walked this earth doing the same thing.
All right, so we just heard Dr. Tyson talking about Isaac Newton. He's also one of my favorites, very interesting character. And he makes him sound out as if he, just like the others he talked about, were interested in religion when he couldn't explain things. But luckily he does mention the General Scholium that Newton writes as part of his great work, the Principia. So I want to take you there briefly. And here it is. The first couple of paragraphs do talk about the planets and their orbits, and the last couple as well. But the most of the interior is talking about the properties of God. And then the quote he mentions is right here. This most beautiful system of the planet, of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. So this section right here is basically a design argument, and all this text comes from, I'll go to the home page here, what's called the Newton Project. This came out in February 2024, and they had a hard time getting all of his papers published. There's a lot of people who didn't want people to see what Newton wrote about because, well, he wrote a lot about religion, and he wrote, I mean a lot, I mean a million words on religion. And you can go in here and under the text and you can see the stuff you've heard of, alchemy, mathematics, and scientific, but you can also read some of his religious texts. Now some LDS connections I think are quite interesting. Most people have heard about his dislike of the Trinity, thinking that there was not one God, but there were, each part of the Trinity was a separate being. And he goes through a lot of scriptural arguments for that. But one I find even more interesting, you can also find the Newton Project. I'll take you there. Is where he talks about apostasy that thinks that he's in, and he's expecting to see God to visit again. Basically, right here he's talking about the Egyptians being transgressed and sending Moses, a prophet, to reform them. And the Babylonians, he talks about this repeating theme of people transgressing and God sending people. I'll let you read this on your own. And eventually he talks about, well, the Gentiles, they also need to be reformed. They also have transgressed, and we need God to come again, and just like Moses and other prophets, he's expecting or predicting that we need another prophet or God to come again to help us out of this transgression that we're in, or the confusing of religious tradition and so forth. So I thought that was very interesting. So to say that Newton only talks or thinks about God when he doesn't have an argument anymore, again, back to that God of the gaps, is pretty ridiculous when you examine this and take a closer look at what he actually wrote about.
We're left with the realization, of course, that intelligent design, while real in the history of science, while real in the presence of sort of philosophical drivers, is nonetheless a philosophy of ignorance. And so, regardless of what our political agenda is, all you have to say is, science is a philosophy of discovery, intelligent design is a philosophy of ignorance. That's all. I don't need to see whether, have you discovered anything lately? If not, get out of the science classroom. But I'm not going to say, don't teach this, because it's real, it happened. So I don't want people to sweep it under the rug, because if you do, you're neglecting something fundamental that's going on in people's minds when they confront things they don't understand. And it happens to the greatest of the minds, as it happens to everyone else, many, if not most other people in the public.
All right, I'm not sure what Dr. Tyson is trying to get out here, because the materialistic philosophy seems to have hit a brick wall, and using designer arguments, design philosophy, I think is what he used. Looking at nature, for example, and trying to figure out how this was engineered, how could it have been engineered, instead of saying it was brought about by random process, which is not working, is not able to explain the complexity of these machines and what they're able to do, by instead looking at the fruits of design, which I've included some pictures here, hardware, computers, factory floors. These are obviously designed, lots of complexity, a lot of interacting parts. It's not saying, none of these people are throwing up their hands and saying, let's just give up, God did it all, and not think about things anymore. It says, let's think more deeply about things. Let's think about it in a different way. Let's try to solve the problem in a different way and look at things in a new perspective. That's what it says. Let's not keep beating our head against the wall and say, well, it's got to be materialism. It has to be this, even though it's not working, and it can't solve this miracle of life, this complexity of life. So I don't quite get his argument.
But my favorite way to end this, then, is to just reflect on, I want to do just a fast tirade on stupid design, and this will be fast. Look at all the things that just want to kill us, okay? Most planet orbits are unstable. Star formation is completely inefficient. Most places in the universe will kill life instantly. Instantly. The people that say, oh, the forces of nature are just right for life. Excuse me. Just look at the volume of the universe where you can't live. You will die instantly. That's not what I call the Garden of Eden, all right? Galaxy orbits that we orbit once every couple 100 million years, you're bound to come close to a supernova that will wipe out your ozone layer and kill everybody on the surface who doesn't otherwise have dark skin, because your high energy rays will give you skin cancer. We're on a collision course with the Andromeda Galaxy. Gone is this beautiful spiral that we have. And of course, we're on a one-way expanding universe as we wind down to oblivion, as the temperature of the universe asymptotically approaches absolute zero. That's the universe. Then Earth. Okay,
so he goes through this list here one by one and trying to explain to us how, for lack of a better word, how awful this universe, how difficult it is to live in any part of this universe. The sun is going to destroy us. If we're out in the middle of empty space, we're destroyed because of the lack of pressure and the temperatures. And if you go out by where Pluto is, it's too cold. There's not enough energy from the sun, and everything's just really difficult. And and harsh and miserable. What a design failure. And yet, if you flip the coin over and you look at it at the other side, and you realize, under all of these extremely difficult circumstances that he lays out, nonetheless, here we are. Life exists. And it exists on this planet under extreme design constraints. And if you just go through, you can find many books on this. They'll go through lists and lists of things that had to be just right for us as human beings to be able to be here, from the distance we are from the sun, from the tilt of our planet, needing to have a moon, to an atmosphere to block most of the radiation that comes from the sun and only letting the light come in, to drive photosynthesis, to heat up the planet, to have these miracular properties of water, so that it freezes, it floats, it changes its density and floats, so that all of the bodies of water don't freeze over and kill everything that inside of them. That they have this brilliant property to other types of molecules like to break down, and then they're soluble in them. Cells, all those, the ability to get the molecules to be able to move and transfer them from one place to another location, not fixed like in hardware, where all you can move is current through them and nothing can change. Here you have a very dynamic environment that allows for things to change over time, to have a new product, to be able to sense things and almost give these particles a free will, if you will. So I don't see how Dr. Tyson is providing an argument against intelligent design or against a creator. He seems to be providing one for a creator, and how difficult it is. Yet nonetheless, here we are under these highly improbable circumstances, living and thriving and so forth. One little caveat at the end is, I always hear about Andromeda colliding with us. Maybe two things. The collision first. So we have supposedly a universe that is expanding, and yet we have some phenomenon like this Andromeda collision, where things want to collide with each other. I find that interesting. The Big Bang itself, I find interesting. More so, here you have this thesis, this document that predicts a creation event, and then you have this thing called the Big Bang that just says, hey, look, we've got evidence, this is how we think things have panned out. And you look at the Bible and how it explains the beginning of things, and it seems to say, hey, I've already predicted how the universe began, and you're just verifying what I'm already telling you. Now, oddly enough, after having said that, and listening to a lot of people who really have a problem with the Big Bang, because it does seem to invoke a lot of creation thoughts, I'm actually personally not really a big supporter of the Big Bang. That's just me speaking. Particularly in my religion, we have a lot of references that kind of give the impression that the universe is infinite, and the creation events were organizing events, pulling matter together, making new things out of them, taking disorder and making order, lowering the entropy, putting information into systems, that type of thing. A lot of hands-on ideas is what my LDS religion seems to be teaching me. Now, whether that includes the Big Bang organizing event or not, I'm not really sure, but I'm not too big of a fan of the Big Bang. Then let's go back to his video, and then we'll take a look at some more of his ideas.
Volcanoes, tsunami just killed, I think that number's higher, up 200,000 people, floods, tornadoes. None of this is any sign that there's a benevolent anything out there. And this 90% should be 99%, as was earlier noted. That's of all life that has ever lived is now extinct. Inner solar system is a shooting gallery, comets, asteroids, duck. And look how long it took to make multicellular life. Not from the beginning of the Earth. Life happened quickly, but not multicellular life. you needed your cyanobacteria to sort of crank on the oxygen, get the oxygen budget going. Then you could have sort of, that's sort of rocket fuel for multicellular creatures. But that took 3.5 billion years. That's hardly an efficient plan with us in mind.
Okay, so here's a list that Dr. Tyson trying to, I guess, highlight more bad design. And I got some general comments. But first, let me highlight a few of these. It says we can't live on 2/3 of its surface. And well, why is that? Because we have this huge amount of water, and frankly, we don't know where all this water came from. We're mystified as to where all this huge amount of water came from. But it's sure a good thing that we have it here, because water has a very high specific heat. It can absorb a lot of energy before it changes temperature very much, and it provides the Earth with a lot of, I guess my term would be a balance. It's really difficult to get the Earth to heat it really fast or really cold, because you have this large mass of water that's going to make it difficult. It's going to have a lot of inertia, so to speak. It's going to be hard to get the Earth to get real hot or get real cold because of the presence of water. So that's a good design feature. Let's go down here a little bit. The mass extinctions. 9% of all life that ever lived is now extinct. Well, where is this life now? We find it underground in these, going through these chemical changes that we are, again, sure grateful of all this fossil fuel we have that we can get out of the ground and use to drive all our industry, drive our technology, keep our houses cool and our cars running and so forth. I think there's a big design element in trying to get that material in place for our use. I don't know if God intended that to be there. It seems like it was an intention to have that there, to have that available to us. In 3.5 billion years to make multicellular life. I don't, and that somehow is inefficient. I don't know how we can dictate God's design timescale. What is time to God? If it takes 3.5 billion years to push an event, if He wants to let it sit and cook for a while, what's that to us? If the outcome is this world that we get to live on and enjoy. Now I'm going to do a couple general comments. My religion teaches us that there's a reason why we're here. This is not paradise. This is not the celestial kingdom that we're in. This world was built. We're not living in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and outside of the Garden of Eden, the conditions are as we see them now. With earthquakes, with animals eating each other, and tornadoes and hurricanes. And apparently this was pronounced good, that God saw this was good for us. This is what we needed so we could have the experiences for, to come down here, to get a body, to gain experiences. We're not going to gain experiences if everything's perfect and nobody dies. If nobody dies and it's all perfect, there's not going to be no motivation to want to learn anything. If we have an infinite amount of time, we're going to just sit there and say, hey, why do I want to change myself or do anything better? If there's nothing to cause you to want to do that, if there's no stimulus for any of that. So I think we got to look at it in the perspective of the designer and what was the intent of the outcome here in making this earth. It's not just this pristine, perfect place. It's a place that's good for us to be able to develop and become more like God. So I think the design is quite elegant if you look at it through that perspective, through that lens. So we're going to take a look at what he says about humans next.
And in human beings, this is like the most tragic of them. I don't even include here the expression of free will where people want to kill each other. I'm talking about nature killing us without the help of human beings. Aggressive childhood leukemia, hemophilia, all of this. And we so much praise about the human eye, but anyone who's seen the full breadth of the electromagnetic spectrum will recognize how blind we are, okay? And part of that blindness means we can't see, we can't detect magnetic fields, ionizing radiation, radon. We are like sitting ducks for ionizing radiation. We have to eat constantly because we're warm-blooded. Crocodile eat a chicken a month, it's fine, okay? So we're always looking for food. These gases at the bottom, you can't smell them, taste them, you breathe them in, you're dead, okay? So I'm almost done. I'm sorry, I'm taking up your time here. So, and with the birth defects, most are unknown. Others, it's like abuse and infection and stuff that human beings had something to do with. We have no idea. Oops, I pushed a button by accident, sorry. No idea. No idea. And, and birth defects are tragic. They're tragic, particularly if they happen to the family afflicted by it. And you just look at images of these aborted fetuses because of and most of these are stillborn. Others are born with a heart outside the body. And so this is all simply stupid design. And the problem is, if you look for what is intelligent, and you can find some things that are just really beautiful and really, hey, that's a clever. The ball socket of the shoulder, and a lot of things you can point to, but then you stop looking at all the things that confound that revelation. And so if I came upon a frozen waterfall and it just struck me for all its beauty, I would then turn over the rock and try to find a millipede, okay, or some kind of deadly newt, and then put that in context and realize, of course, the universe is not here for us.
All right, so let's take a look at this list. This world is pretty tough on our bodies. It's a tough environment to live in. This is not the celestial kingdom. This is not paradise, as I mentioned. This is a place that's good for us, that will help us grow, help us be able to serve each other and have opportunities for serving each other, opportunities for growth and for failure and so on. So I'm actually pretty amazed that our body is able to keep on going and doing it does. We put objects and we eat things and digest them, and our body's got to break them down and distribute them. Our cells got to recognize what it needs and what it doesn't need, absorb it through its cell membrane, get it to pass through all that fluid world and get it to the mitochondria or whatever it needs to head. It seems like to me it should be failing all the time. To me it seems more miraculous that this machine of ours keeps going and with very minimal failure. Matter of fact, most of the time I've had problems and gone to the doctor. My 90% of the time my body ends up healing itself, solving the problem itself. The doctors do very little. How does it do that? We could do 2 or 3 hours of just talking about the miraculous nature of our bodies. That does not mean I'm invoking God and saying, well, God did it, I don't care. It's saying, hey, this is a very interesting design here. How did he do it? Let's figure it out. Let's try to understand this, how we engineered this thing. Let's take a look at vision. For example, he's focusing on where our lack of ability to see all the different wavelengths of light, why we're just focused on 800 nanometers to 400 nanometers. And how do we know that if we're flooded with all these other wavelengths of light that we could see anything at all? I think it's fascinating that the band that we do see is what we receive from the sun in great quantities. I think in the design of the eye itself, I was just watching a video the other day talking about, I think it was called progressive vision or something like that, where how our eyes, it looked like it was a problem, and it turned out to be a really curious solution to a problem, and it's really miraculous how we have this ability of our eyes to look at an image and to hold on to that image just for a little while and to have it not just instantly fade away like a digital circuit where it's there for a moment and it disappears and it comes back, where the image just stays with it just slightly, just for a fraction of a second before the next image is loaded into our brain and looks at that, and it fades away, and that allows us to be able to put individual dots of data to connect them to make a full image, including to be able to see moving pictures and so forth. So what seems to be like a problem inevitably becomes this really engineering solution. Let's take a look a little more down the list here. He's interested in how we sleep most of the time. I don't know why we sleep a lot. Maybe that's part of the engineering, because the human condition is so difficult. It's so hard for a lot of people to be good all the time, and not even all the time. Just try to help each other and try to. It seems it's difficult. You have to put a lot of effort into it. And maybe if we didn't, I'm just speculating here, but maybe if we did sleep as much as we did, we'd be more warfare, more problems. Maybe it's like, we need to put people sleep for a little while, get tired, have to rethink things, start a new day, have new cycles, start over, start fresh, keep trying, instead of like a continuous spectrum of experiences and not having something that repeats itself to allow us a chance to try again and start over. Maybe that's part of the engineering. I don't know.
For any singular purpose. My favorite of all is, of course, you eat, breathe, eat, and drink through the same hole in your body, guaranteeing that some percent of us will choke to death every year, okay? Imagine if you had a separate hole for breathing and eating and talking. That would be just really cool, right? You could drink, breathe, and just talk, and you would never choke, all right? And it's not a hard request. Dolphins breathe and eat through different holes in their body. And that's a mammal. So I'm not, this is like Santa Claus could bring this one.
All right, I've got two things to say about this small section here. I personally suffer from a lot of congestion where there are times where I'll go a couple weeks and I can't breathe through my nose. And it affects actually my eating. It actually becomes difficult to eat if I don't have that. I don't fully understand what's happening physics-wise. Not being able to pass air through my nose, making it difficult to swallow, difficult to, not to chew, not to tear food into different pieces, but to move food into my stomach is difficult when my nose is clogged. It's also difficult to taste my food when I can't move air through my nose. My nose seems to pick up a lot of sensations of taste that I would lose. I'd lose all of that if all suddenly as he points out, we had a different opening for breathing and one for swallowing. Now, I must admit that I think it would be cool to have some modifications. I'm not particularly interested in the ones he's suggesting. I'd like to be able to float around, fly from place to place, things like that. Have maybe superpowers of some sort. I think that'd be pretty cool. And I don't know that is not an impossibility. You hear about Joseph Smith's first vision, and has these beings appear to him, and they're floating above the ground. He has other appearances of people apparently passing through the walls of his room and floating above the ground. So I don't know what the possibilities are. I don't know what we might be able to do in the future. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities. All right, so Dr. Tyson, there's a little more to the video. He does talk maybe like 5 minutes or 8 minutes or something like that. He does talk a little bit about some more what he thinks are design problems. He mentions, why would we put our sewage system next to what he calls our entertainment center, our reproductive system? It's unfortunate that he would view our reproductive system as some strictly entertainment vehicle, when in my opinion, sperm, for example, is probably the most advanced piece of technology that exists in the entire universe, in my opinion. I like to see the day when science can, and someday it will, and when it happens, we will be halfway to becoming a god. That day when science can actually make a miniaturized piece of technology that can replicate itself, that can expand and become some advanced piece of machinery, human beings, that can repair itself and do all the amazing things that we can do, and have it all miniaturized down into a size that we can't even see. So I'm leaving it on this picture because this is a good segue, because this is Richard Dawkins, you can see off to the left, and he is an atheist who loves to bash people who have a belief in God. And so we're going to be taking a good look at one or two of his lectures. So stay tuned.